shout out to the little monk in each of my cells who transcribes my DNA by candlelight. That's off Tumblr somewhere. So, again, with this concept of the cross, or like that image of suffering and death as a pattern of how to live, how to live as a finite being. So, as finite beings, really what that entails is that there's some things and like connections and threads in the world that are life to me and light to me, and there are some that are death, and if those encounter me and if I engage with them, that I start to die. Why? Or hurt, or suffer, or be afraid. Why? Is it so that God can plunge me into darkness and make me suffer because that's a part of life and we need a balance of pain and happiness? I wouldn't put it that way. There is that scripture and like that phrase of dying to death. And conquering death by death. And like the idea that like a double negative then becomes a positive. If you say no to something that is no, then that becomes the yes. So that's just such a cool idea, and when I see it in practice of like dying to death. Because there is this sort of ability in me as a finite being to die, to not be, to cut out certain parts of reality. Is that there so that I can die? Seems to be that it's there so that I can live, paradoxically, by like saying no to what would like say no to me, by I guess one half of the equation is that is there so that I can be particular, so that I can be unique and like different and have my own definition. And then that's what I talked about of like the cross as vocation. Then also so that I can discern what is death, what is destruction and stealing and killing and destroying and like accusation and fear and all, and die to that and say no to that. It's very like satisfying sort of movement. This is anywhere from, falling, to climbing gym, spraining your ankle for 2 months. I don't speak from personal experience in any way. To like getting out of a church or like a religion or like a philosophy or a religion that is harmful, or a relationship that's harmful. Or even, I don't know, like being sick or having like chronic pain and learning to navigate that and live with that, which I don't actually have experience with that, or grief. There are these, in every case, there are these like moments of like the valley of the shadow of death and like the U-shaped journey, right? So there's the thing of like the hill that I'll die on, right? That also idea of a valley. And those in practice are basically moments of refining, right, and discovering who I am and who I am not. In a conversation the other day, I think it was on Grail Country, somebody was talking about how, like, as kids, it's healthy for kids to be in a little bit of risky situations, or like climbing a tree, or like being in a river or something, where they have to learn their boundaries and learn how to deal with fear and like that ultimate no, and essentially how to deal with death and learning boundaries. The point isn't to, put them in the river so that they'll get swept away in the rapids and die. The point is so that they won't, so that they can be in there and navigate it and feel like that fear and know how to properly react to that so that they stay where it's safe, and then they can have fun and, like, be on the edge or whatever. But yeah, I am seeing it in a lot of places, this concept of conquering death by death, dying to death. What do you do with, like, the negativity? Say no to it itself. Yeah, because again, we have this sort of power to not be and to say no. So use that to choose life. For yourself. One example of a pattern that I should, like, die to. So my friend Mark from Video Game Therapy, and his main channel called Mark Bacon, but I was talking about, like, habits, and the image of habits, or a habit or a pattern that you ingrain in yourself is a root, and then that can flower. If you are willing to put those roots down, then you can have the flowers. And also in the sense of, like, more traditional metaphor of, like, putting down roots in a place or in a relationship, which then allows you to have the results and the fruit of it. But I have a certain habit or pattern and root that I have put down, which prevents the putting down of the roots. So it is this sort of paradoxical thing of death being an existing thing that prevents existing, a living sort of existing thing that prevents life, and then of dying to death being like a death and a cutting off and a saying no that allows for life. Anyway, so I have this habit, root / ROUTE, root, of, like, in whatever situation, always keeping open or trying to keep open, like, an escape and, a way. So I want to be safe, right? And whatever the circumstances, just to always be safe. But the iffy way that I would do that is by having sort of in the back of my mind, like, holding something back or keeping, and I'm not, again, talking about having healthy boundaries or keeping one's relationship with God in one's heart, regardless of circumstances or anything like that. I'm talking about, like, being afraid always and always having an escape route, like, how could I sort of get out of this situation or out of this relationship or whatever? What if I lost it all, that I would be okay and intact and the same, to keep back in that way. And it's because I want to be safe and because I don't want to be left alone and miserable. But then I ask myself, where is that route going? I'm keeping this path open at all times, no matter what the situation is, and no matter how much I'm surrounded by. I have to keep, like, the little escape route open. Where is that going? Exactly the place that I'm trying to escape, which is, like, basically hell, being alone by oneself. This doesn't make very much sense. That's not how it's done. So what I need to do, is to burn that bridge. That pattern is of death and of hell and like cutting off my life, so that needs to be cut off. That needs to die. Conquer death by death. Some other characteristics of this sort of dead mindset or perspective that I want to die to. In that video that I have linked in the description, they're talking about Mount Sophia versus Mount Babel, and basically an idol versus a symbol. And this overlaps with my concept of like a hierarchy, like an unhealthy kind of hierarchy versus a more integrated beauty first understanding and perception of the world. So if I take that route, So if I take that route and keep this open, what I'm doing is withholding a part of myself, and this is sort of what was also said in that conversation. I'm withholding a part of myself apart from everything else that is just judging. And if I build my perspective and therefore my world and therefore myself off of that, what I get is this mountain, this Babel, of just like one dead sort of perspective. It's very black and white. There's a strict hierarchy. There's this thing of like fear and competition, and that all ties in. And existentialist fear as well. They were discussing a nihilistic or atheist existentialist view versus like the Christian existentialism. Anyway, so that's like having a mountain. If you think of the hierarchy as like a mountain, having a mountain and standing back from it and looking at it, you're just going to see the one perspective in one way, and it'll be dead and everything. Versus if I know the mountain by climbing around on it and maybe living somewhere and going for walks and sitting in the meadow that's over here and going up to the summit, but I can't really breathe very well up there, so you have to come down, and like integrating myself with it, not holding myself back, but going and being in it, and that gives it's the same reality, and there is the same structure and hierarchical structure even, but it's more like overlapping hierarchies, and time and like movement and constantly changing and just relational and alive. So if I die to that like apart judgy self, what that really means is living to the true self, which is integrated with the world and which is climbing Mount Sophia, which is what that channel's called. The song of the Oholos song, Constellations, also describes this same pattern and actually kind of uses the same imagery. The Oholos songs are so symbolically deep, like they just have an instinct for it. Yeah, their song Constellations. It's funny because I listened to that song and I always heard it as describing Mount Sophia, as describing a symbol. Whereas I think the original intention of the song was written to describe Babel. Like they do use even that imagery, and to describe like the false idols and dead images of reality that we might put between ourselves and reality to protect ourselves. But it's sort of the same thing, right? It's just like in a different way, in a different spirit, and a different perspective. Because they say, this hill I'll die on, right, is about This hill I'll die on is about 90 meters of bricks, colored indigo and inscribed with my name and lined in cedar. But the words fall flat like cymbals crashing. I don't know if that pun was intentional, but it's a good pun. The words fall flat like cymbals crashing, like molars gnashing. 'Cause like constellations a million years away, every good intention is interpolation. A line we drew in the array, looking for the faces, looking for the shapes in the silence. I think that one of the bit blackout poems, I'm going to start calling them highlight poems though, that I did from this book is relevant to the whole false versus true self, dying to death, dying to self, which I don't like as a phrase because I've always misunderstood it at least, but that, yeah. Here it is. And I'll end with this. Death, the plastic saint, wants dying for us. Dethronement, no pride. All we ourselves shadows. Rebel, assert self, perfect, even desired. Sit on the throne and declare, I am. That is essence, good, the deep heart of every man. The usurper on a stolen throne, under the guise of self, can die.